of the media didn't find favour with John Smith, and Mandelson's fervent belief in the need for Labour to change rapidly was not shared by the new leader.
I think there was a sense, a year into the Parliament, that having experienced our rather severe and very depressing sort of dousing of with cold water at the election in '92, and realising that we really had to shake things up and go further and do a lot more if we were going to be electable, and certainly not repeat the mistakes that we had made at the election, that perhaps had sort of worn off. I think it was a sort of complacency, a touch of complacency came in.
John Smith had pledged himself to satisfy one of the demands of the modernisers, reducing the power of the unions in electing the party leader. But in typical style, he pushed through the measure, one member, one vote, with the help of a man who'd been marginalised in the Kinnock era.
He sent for me and said, "John, I've made a calculation, I'm going to lose by 7 points. And I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yes." I said to him, "Have you done a deal with the trade union?" He said, "I don't do any more deals now. There comes a time when I must make my decision. I've made my decision, and I want to win, and I want you to help me win." He also told me that if he didn't win, he would resign.
There's no doubt this man, our leader, put his head on the block by saying, basically, I fervently believe, because that's what he believes, of a relationship, and a strong one, with the trade unions and the Labour Party. He's put his head there. Now's our time to vote. Give us a bit of trust, and let's have this vote support.
Funny enough, into my brain came, he's put his head on the block, and my brain rejected it, and I'm talking all the time saying no. Because if he loses, I can see all these pictures on the television where they chop off his head. And I thought, I can't use that, but I knew the moment required that. And so I said it and risked it, and hopefully it made a contribution.
The modernisers feared that having scored a victory, Smith would simply rest on his laurels and go no further down the path of reform.
I'm sure you won't need them, John, but be fortified in the knowledge of our devotion to you, Curling Welling. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the present. I think I could have done with them about half an hour, actually, before the vote.
He was a great believer in party unity, almost at any cost, even if it meant not facing up to one or two awkward choices and difficult, ticklish issues that we needed to address in the party, which, of course, Tony Blair has done subsequently. So I think young people in the party in particular, felt that there's sort of a one last heave, or one more heave mentality was creeping into the party. And that at the end of the day, however well we seemed to be doing in the middle of the Parliament, that would not serve us successfully and decisively when the next election came along.
On the evening of the 11th of May 1994, John Smith attended a fundraising dinner with Labour supporters and senior politicians at the Park Lane Hotel. Although Smith had suffered a heart attack 5 years previously, his colleagues felt he'd now made a full recovery.
As luck would have it, and I was very lucky, he unusually was sitting next to me at the dinner and had taken the opportunity to bring me up to date with all sorts of gossip, and also discussions that he'd been having with other political leaders and things of this kind, and had a long chat and a full exchange of information.
And I remember him being full of joviality, coming across after he'd made a speech which was substantially off the cuff, not from notes, coming across to Elizabeth and saying, "How was that?" And both of us turning simultaneously and saying it was superb, and feeling that we were going somewhere.
John the next day was due to go campaigning in Essex, and I myself was going to Kent, and he ruefully said to me that we both had an early start the next morning, we shouldn't have stayed up so late. And I said, well, just think how far the party's come, John. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been campaigning in Essex or Kent.
Westminster is in mourning over the death of the Labour leader, John Smith. He was killed by a heart attack this morning.
Despite full medical attention to Mr. Smith, he was pronounced dead at 9:15 on the 12th of May.
I was in Aberdeen the morning that John died. And I remember very vividly because I was just about to start a series of visits, and a telephone call came through saying that John had a heart attack, and then another call came through shortly after that to say that he died. And it was it's impossible to describe the shock that comes upon you, because he was a close friend. He had really helped me into Parliament in many ways. He was someone who was an extraordinarily strong character and personality to be with. He'd been through a difficult period of time because of the changes he'd brought about in the Labour Party, one member, one vote, and so forth, but he was more or less over that. The party was in very good shape, and it was a devastating shock. It was devastating politically, and it was devastating personally.
I was devastated. The sense of political loss was far outweighed by the sense of personal grief, and I cried. I was very, very upset and sad about this.
He was kind and open. He had the instinctive support for people who were less advantaged than he and his family and friends were. And so it was a tragedy, not only in personal terms, but in political terms, when we all experienced his sudden loss. It was awful.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. This is Margaret Beckett.
I think my own colleagues were in shock, just devastated. And it was, I've never known the House in such a mood.
There are few people, the announcement of whose death would bring tears to the eyes of everyone who knew them. John Smith was such a man.
In the occasion in the House, I felt I must not let the party down. In general terms, that we had an election to fight very soon, of crucial importance, that we had inherited a precious legacy from John of public standing and trust, and that nothing must happen that put that at risk or in jeopardy.
With indecent haste, the party and press started to speculate on whom might succeed John Smith. While Tony Blair spoke only of his grief, his name was put forward by elder statesmen.
Well, it was an unsuitable time to choose because it was that very morning, I think, when I was interviewed in Brighton. I thought that the combination of Blair and Prescott, each having the qualities the other lacked, would be unbeatable. And the reason why I suggested Blair was that he had an element of charisma, magic, if you like, about him, which nobody else in the party had to that degree, and which we desperately needed.
Shortly before he died, John Smith himself had accepted that Blair was the man most likely to succeed him.
It was the Monday of the week that he died, and I was in the office with him, and one of the members of staff that were in the press office, Mike Elric, had bet him some money to lose a bit of weight, to sort of set a target. So I made a comment about, well, we all do it, and it'll be a bigger amount and bigger target. And there was some exchange about how, he's got to look after himself, and he said, yeah, he's got to look after the heart. And I said, yes, I said it would be pretty awkward if something happened now. And quick as a flash, he turned around and said, well, what would happen if I disappeared? And what do you think would happen? And before I could answer, he said, it's got to be Tony, hasn't it?
Almost the moment that John died, when I was obviously in a state of shock, I'd lost a very close friend and someone I admired tremendously. Within half an hour of his death, then the whole subject started to change as to who was going to succeed him as leader. And it was, those few days were certainly the most traumatic I've ever experienced in politics and never want to experience again, because you were coping with a good deal of grief, genuine